guess it's good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists. Welcome to the Free-4-All-Friday edition of the Dan Clement Show. Oh, this is episode 828. I'm your host, Dan Clement, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is June 23rd in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and he does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And we have a really good show for you set up today for Finally Friday. Lord willing, the creeks don't rise. It looks like everything's working good. And I say that, usually when I say that, I'm not going to superstitious too, folks. I shouldn't be as a Christian. I say that that kind of stuff and then something technically goes wrong, but we've had a couple good days here on the show, technically, and we're hoping to continue that trend, as it were. Yesterday, it was after the show, the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate unmasked their GOP bill. They don't have enough votes for, I'm telling you right now, the way it stands, they don't have enough votes. Democrats are not going to vote for this at all. And the Democrats are being unfair in the way they're approaching this. We saw yesterday where Nancy Pelosi was saying, well, we need to read the bill before we can vote on it. And that was totally polar opposite of what she said when Obamacare came along in 2009, 2010. Well, we have to pass the bill to see what's in it. Again, you got to remember that anti-freedom folks that are progressive leftists out there, yesterday didn't happen. Don't worry about yesterday. It's today and tomorrow we have to worry about. There's nothing to see looking behind us. And talking about looking behind us, you know, we're in the middle of this health care bill. What's going on underneath the surface, because of all this Russia thing is going on, is a lot of, I think, some good things that are happening out there. One of them is the ongoing debate about the Paris climate accords and how President Trump was a tyrant for pulling us out. Roger Moore said that he's a I can't remember his exact words. I don't particularly care for Roger Moore, so I try not to read much of what he has to say, and I think it's in an article I'll share with you here about something else. But you know, that he pretty much, well, no, it is about climate change. Sorry, I do apologize about that. I do have an article down here about let's see here, where's it at? It's Pittsburgh, not Paris, explaining the climate hysterica by Peter Wood over at publicdiscourse.com. He talks about Michael Moore in there having a few choice words about President Trump. These actors out there, switching gears here, this is Free-for-All Friday. We'll talk about just about anything that we've ever talked about on the show. Johnny Depp is getting into the fray, and there's a Drudge Report article out there. I'm not going to put it in my show notes here, but just to let you know, you go look up the Drudge Report and saying, when was the last time an actor assassinated a president? Talking about John Wilkes Booth. And that's, to me, folks, in this climate, in this charged political climate, that's stupid to say. That is a veiled threat against the President of the United States. Now, whether he meant it or not doesn't matter. He shouldn't say it. You know, you shouldn't say it at all. So, I forgot. I got to turn this light out. Sorry, folks. I had some people tell me that my video, and it does look well lit on YouTube, it's too much light from that overhead light there. So, anyway, so they're still out there talking about Donald Trump and how bad a person he is and how he's going to kill everybody, causing mass genocide in the world by pulling out the climate accords, by getting rid of Obamacare. And one of the biggest things, and this actually happens to be one of the top articles on Google News about this, coming from, of all sources, the discredited New York Times. The headline is "Shifting Dollars from Poor to Rich is a Key Part of the Senate Health Care Bill." When it was passed to begin with, when Obamacare was passed to begin with, it was a massive redistribution of wealth, just like climate change would have been if we'd have kept going with the Accords. It's a massive redistribution of wealth. It's a way for global socialists out there to rob the rich, enrich themselves, and not give anything to the poor. And if you don't believe me, go follow some of the money trails. It's ridiculous how much some of these, like George Soros, makes off of the tax dollars of different countries, of the people of these different countries. It is insane how much money he makes off that. It's insane how much his progressive leftist groups like Open Societies makes from donations for people. Honestly, folks, the more and more I discuss things with folks, the anti-freedom crowd out there, the more I'm convinced that they're actually the low information voters out there, because I've been in discussion since last night with a gentleman on Discuss. Some websites use Discuss as their comments, which is fine. I like that to a certain extent because it comes up my Google alerts and lets me know when a conversation's been commented on, or maybe a reply to my comment. And again, I put out facts, reason, common sense. I ask some reasonable questions about how do you get to work? Because he said I'm a shill of the fossil fuel. I must work for an industry that relies on fossil fuels. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you get to work? When you go on vacation, how do you get to that vacation? When you throw your light switch, what's that being powered by? Won't even answer simple questions like that. And to me, those are simple questions, folks. And they always have been simple questions. But they won't answer them. They absolutely will not take the time out to answer them because it doesn't fit their narrative. Because if they say they use these things, then they show themselves to be hypocrites. And that's a huge problem for them. Not for me, for them. I understand the need for fossil fuels now until someone comes up with a better way. And I support hydrogen. Not from hydrocarbons. There's a lot of people out there that confuse that. You can get hydrogen from oil, but it's not it's the same hydrogen, but the process is dirtier than going and getting it from seawater. And last time I checked, we have a lot of seawater around the world, and you can actually use. See, this is the funny part about the whole thing, that the equation I never talk about. You can actually use wind and solar to run the electrolyzers that split the water into oxygen and hydrogen, and still have energy left over. And that could be, the hydrogen could be the battery for the solar and wind. Okay, and it has to be developed. Well, we don't have the full infrastructure now, but you know what? And that was one of the arguments. Well, with a libertarian I had along the same lines. It was an argument I had with a libertarian along the same lines that we don't have the infrastructure to go hydrogen right now. And I'm like, but when we started off with electricity with Thomas Edison and Westinghouse, we didn't have the infrastructure for all the electricity. And if that was the argument, we don't have the infrastructure, we wouldn't have electricity today. So that, to me, that's not a fair, good argument. That's just throwing stuff out there, making people think, well, we don't have the infrastructure, so I guess we can't do this. And not thinking, and this is supposed to be a libertarian-minded gentleman I'm talking to, not thinking about the past, that everything we had to have a starting point. All the infrastructure we had, roads, water, dams, everything, all the power we had to have a beginning point, had to build the infrastructure. So it amazes me, folks. It really does. It amazes me how short-sighted people are when it comes to these subjects. So let's dip right into the road. The official drink of the Dan Columbus Show is Rocky Mountain High Brands drinks, power shots, bars. They have an Eagle water brand, Spirit Eagle. That's an alkaline water. I haven't tried it yet. I want to try it. I just got, and the reason why I'm talking about this morning, I just got my delivery of my my lemonade. It reminds me a lot of Fresca. And it's 16-ounce can, folks, and only has 23 grams of beet sugar. It's a natural sugar. And I'm convinced, folks, I'm trying to do some research to find out, and I think they're keeping us close to the vest. I have a suspicion that some of the sugar that we're getting in our American diet, as far as even the granular sugar, is high fructose corn syrup that has been dehydrated and granularized. But I haven't been able to find anything about that. But Rocky Mountain High brands use pure beet sugar, which is a natural sugar, which if that's all the sugar, and usually that's about all the sugar I get in a day, I'm doing good as a diabetic. But more importantly, these are hemp infused, hemp oil infused. And I haven't had a drink of hemp oil infused liquids for about 4 or 5 days, and I can feel the difference. My pain is there almost all the time again, and the fatigue's there. And so I finally got a delivery. It's in the refrigerator right now, cooling down. And after the show, I'm going to crack open me a lemonade, and we're going to sit down and relax and contemplate life with the Rocky Mountain High brands. And full disclosure, I am a stockholder in the company. It's part of my retirement portfolio, along with some other hemp stock that I bought in my retirement portfolio. So I just want to get that out, full disclosure. Let's see. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. Chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. And this is talking about Jesus was going to give his disciples a lesson in praying. He said, "When you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to the Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him." Then he goes on to give them an example. An example of how to pray. Now, a lot of folks use that. They call it the Lord's Prayer, and they use that as an actual prayer. But if you read the scriptures and you dissect the scriptures and use proper hermeneutics, you'll understand that this was just an example of how they're supposed to pray. You pray in this way, he said. And then he gives him the example, and that's how we should pray. But that's not a rote prayer that we should recite all the time. And a lot of people do. A lot of people do, and I think they do it erroneously. I think they can, are they sinning? Yeah, I believe they are, because they're not really, what are they thinking about when they just recite that prayer over and over and over again? I did as a Catholic growing up. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive those that trespass against us. And I don't have it totally right there, but it's been a long time since I recited that. And there's another one. Every time we had a meal, we recited the same prayer. If you ever watch Blue Bloods, they're Catholic family on the TV show with Tom Selleck, and they recite a dinner prayer that we recited when I was growing up. So there's some things you need to realize when it comes to prayer, especially as Christians, folks. Today's quote meal comes from Martin Luther. It's real short. "Peace if possible, truth at all costs." Peace if possible, but truth at all costs. And this happens all the time, folks. Whenever we take a strong position about anything, there's going to be people that disagree with us. But as long as we're showing the facts and being truthful about it, not lying about it, not being a sneaky Pete about anything, we should have peace. But there's going to be some people that are going to disagree with us, agree with us, and take us to task, and not be at peace with us. But their facts and everything, they can't back up what they're saying with facts and truth. And so we need to be at peace if possible. Paul told the Romans, as long as it relies on you, be at peace with all men. That means I got to do things to be peaceful with all men, but I still got to speak the truth. I still, it's God over man. I got to follow what God says, not what man says. And that's very, very important in our world today. And that's very, very important to a lot of things, folks, out there as we live our lives. I go back to some of the hard sciences, as you might say, mathematics, mechanics. You know, there's truth and facts about mechanics. There's certain things you can or cannot do with a V8 engine. You know, and there's certain things that must be there in order for it to work, and that's just a fact. And that's just the truth. And you can argue against that all day long, and if you don't do it, if you don't have a piston in one of the cylinders, it'll run, but it won't run right. It won't be right, and after a while, it won't even run. You know, it'll tear itself apart because it's imbalanced. I know there's some engines out there that actually, you know, V8s that actually gear down or drop the engine down to 4-cylinder, and still, there are mechanical principles behind that. They have to shut off certain cylinders to keep the whole thing in balance. So it's not just a willy-nilly type thing, and that's, folks, that's the way it is in life too. It's not a willy-nilly type thing in life. We need to live with facts and truths, and we don't have those, and we try to live by those. We're not going to get very far in life. We really aren't. Today's daily Bible lesson comes from Ben Gisselback of PlainSimpleFaith.com, protecting the Lord's Supper. Why I like the little cup and wafer. And it's a good article. And I remember, and I don't know if Dave remembers this, over in Scotland, we had a debate in our church library over in Scotland about, and it's actually from Sunbury, where I live now, outside of where I live now, at the Sunbury Church of Christ, where they debated one cup or many cups. And I remember reading that debate. We have a copy of that in our church library at the Susquehanna Valley Church of Christ. And I remember reading that. And the one thing, and I was a new Christian, the one thing that was glaringly left out in that whole debate was the importance of the fruit of the vine and the bread. They didn't even cover that. And it was an argument over whether you should use one cup or many cups. And I think Ben does a really good job in here talking about that. So go over to danclemenshow.com and click on that link after the show. And as usual, if you're watching YouTube, you don't see these links in the bottom. That's because I put them all on my show notes page instead of duplicating everything. And the first link you'll come to at the bottom, you know, underneath my description or my little, you know, plug for the show, what I'm thinking about for the show, is the danclemenshow.com link. If you can't remember the Dan Clement Show and put a .com behind it, there's a link right there. You can click on that, take you over there, and just look up the episode, and all the links are there. And I do that on purpose because I use the show notes page not only for YouTube, but also for my Blog Talk Radio audience, because I only have a certain amount of space I can put in the title and the description of the show, and it doesn't allow me to put all these links in there. So that's why I created a show notes page to do this. And it doesn't make any sense to do any extra work for myself, and it's not really hard for anybody else out there. Either you remember the Dan Clement Show and put a .com behind it, or you just follow the link at the bottom of the page. Now, before I get into everything else in here, I do have an article here by Gracie Olmstead over at thefederalist.com, and it's entitled, "We Need to Stop Treating Politics Like Religious Dogma." And I think this is a very well-written article. I have my cup in the way here. Can't see what I'm doing here. This is a very well-written article. It's about 4 pages. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the first synopsis and then highlight the rest of it for you. And she wrote this on the 21st of June of this year. Following last week's attempted assassination of Republican congressman by a progressively inclined shooter, our political discourse has again turned to the subjects of civility and hate. How have we gotten to this point in which a Bernie Sanders supporter would attempt to kill politicians on the other side of the aisle? How could our presidential election foment enough hate and discord to result in the shooting of congressmen playing baseball? 68% of American voters think our discourse is getting less civil, according to CBS News. Even more astounding, 3/4 of Americans think our current political discourse is encouraging violence. That number reflects the opinion of 85% of Democrats and 68% of Republicans. Meanwhile, Pew Research Center found that about 1 in 4 voters strongly dislike the other political party, even considering their political opponents a threat to the nation's well-being. According to the Washington Post, that suggests a vehement dislike, even perhaps hate, for the political other among 78 million Americans. The above data makes it clear we need to consider our political conversations and emotions. We've been talking about that a lot, folks. And the emotions driving it. We need to uncover more thoughtful ways to interact with each other and means of conversation that don't encourage fear-mongering and bombast over over thoughtfulness and compassion. Let me reread that. Sometimes these folks put these sentences together. We need to uncover more thoughtful ways to interact with each other and means of conversations that don't encourage fear-mongering and bombast over thoughtfulness and compassion. This isn't about standing around in a circle, holding hands, singing songs. It's about preventing violence, hatred, and schisms that tear the country apart. And this is something we've been dealing with for quite a while on the show here. And I know other shows are doing it also. That the rhetoric out there, the civil discourse, the public discourse is not civil anymore. And there's a reason why. And I'm going to read this one and I'm going to read this other one. We read about the globalists, which are just nothing more than progressive leftists on a global scale, yesterday, and how they try to break us down in tribes, how they try to make us look at each other without seeing the humanity in each other, because they're, talking about, one of the things they're talking about up there about destroying the world, or a threat to the nation's well-being, things like that. And they make these statements out of emotions, folks. I'm almost 100% correct in saying this, that there's too many people out there that are running around on their emotions, and they don't sit down and think about these things, okay? She goes on to say, stop treating politics like religion. And this is where a lot of people fall down. Those that believe in human-caused climate change are a religion unto themselves. Liberal progressives and liberalism, socialism, is a religion unto themselves. Just go back and read the writings of John Stuart Mill back in the late 1800s. This guy was trying to destroy Christianity, take it out of public discourse because it couldn't be proven with science. Couldn't prove the miracles, couldn't prove the resurrection. None of it, anything that the Bible talked about when it come to miracles or anything like that, you couldn't prove with science. So if you couldn't prove it with science, you have to take it out. And John Stuart Mill wasn't the first one to think of this either. And I don't know if Thomas Jefferson was the first one either. But in American history, we have a long history about this. Jefferson rewrote the New Testament, taking out all the miracles that you couldn't prove with science. And so, naturally, and folks, this is something that I know atheists don't agree with, but God created man with a soul. And that's how we are like God. Let us create man in our own image. Let us, he's talking about the Godhead, create man in our own image. This physical form is not what he was talking about. We're spiritual beings. We have a spirit. We have a soul. And that spirit and that soul is God-shaped. And we need to fill it with something. And if we don't fill it with God, we're going to fill it with something else. I mean, folks, those are just the facts of life. And we see the evidence all around us where people are so fanatical and have such a fervor for, like, global warming or climate change, human-caused climate change. They have such a fervor for healthcare, for socialism in government, redistribution of wealth, whatever it is, the environment. They have such a fervor. I mean, it's almost fanatical. The way they treat these subjects, and if you dare say anything against it, no matter how truthful and fact-filled it might be, you're disregarded as a kook. You're just a climate denier. When that really isn't the case. I always thought science was about questioning things. And if you put forth a theory or something like that, and you deny people the chance to question it, that's not science. I'm sorry, that is not science. And these people are, they have to be peer-reviewed. Well, what happens if there's somebody that's not actually a peer scientist, but has a grasp on science and can articulate it and make some pretty good statements against those? Well, it's not a peer. It's not a climatologist. He's not a scientist. He just needs to sit down and shut up because he doesn't know what he's talking about. And see, that's how they shut down the conversation. And Gracie's talking about, stop treating politics like a religion. Now she goes on to say here in America, organized religion has slowly lessened its importance in people's day-to-day lives. The number of people who attend church every week has dropped, and the Americans who identify themselves as nons, religiously speaking, is on the rise. Though many will still say they believe in God, that doesn't guarantee regular participation in a church, mosque, or synagogue. Meanwhile, political dogma is on the rise. We virtue signal not through religious adherence, but via protesting and voting. We treat our political ideologies not just as governing ideas for the nation, but also often as private orthodoxies. So, a lot of the views that the folks in the anti-freedom crowd and the leftist progressives in this country and the world are orthodoxies. Just like my beliefs in God and Christianity and Christ and everything is considered an orthodoxy, theirs is no less. Theirs is no less of an orthodoxy. Ironically enough, I think this has its roots in the mingling of religious persuasion with politics. For quite some time, the American church has adopted the trappings of various political partnerships, or partisanship, in order to spread their message and draw people to the pews. This was obviously true with the moral majority whose political message aligned with Republicans' platforms, but more liberal churches have also built a platform and audience around social justice causes. Our politics have been defined alongside our religious beliefs for quite some time, and they're correct. And even on this show, I'm a Christian political talk show. I talk about things through the Christian worldview. And if a political policy happens to align with my Christian worldview, that's okay. But what she's talking about here, and this is a huge problem we have in even some in the Church of Christ, I don't recognize it in our local church, although it could be there, is when we start aligning our Christian beliefs up with political beliefs. That's where we get in trouble, and that's where we fall down. It's one thing to adhere to your Christian beliefs and look at politics through your beliefs and say this is right and this is wrong according to my beliefs. But it's a whole nother animal and she was talking about virtue signaling and everything like that, and we're talking about like the LGBT community now with regards to churches. I don't know how many commercials I've seen and how many documentaries and whatnot, blogs and stuff like that, where churches have relented to the political norm of the day and changed their beliefs. And we're talking about like gay marriage. There's been a lot of denominational churches that have changed their beliefs because of politics. They've aligned their beliefs with politics instead of aligning their politics with their belief. And there's a huge difference there, folks. There really is. And it's the way I approach people. I don't personally attack people. And you notice if you get into some of these discussions with folks, eventually if they can't persuade you, I have some bulldog tenacity when it comes to the truth and facts. If they cannot persuade you, then they start personally attacking you because that's the only thing they have left. It's the only thing they have left to try to tear you down. And once that happens, folks, and I even tell them, you just lost the argument, folks. See you later. And I move on. And you talk about, and I'll go read some comments afterwards. You talk about profanity and the vehemence that comes out of some of these folks. And it just amazes me how these people talk about social justice and talk about virtues and virtue signaling and stuff. And they're some of the most vile individuals you ever want to hear. With their speech and their thoughts, because your speech comes out of your thoughts, folks. And that's, well, she goes on to say, the downside of this, a religious participation has faded. The righteousness we associate with political belief has not. We've made our politics into our religion. More often than not, if we talk about guns and capitalism to a Bible Belt dweller, he or she will associate a sort of veneration with the Second Amendment and free markets. If you discuss economic inequality with a Brooklynite, you'll likely hear a righteous indignation rise in their voice. These sentiments aren't wrong necessarily. We're passionate about what we believe because we think those beliefs have massive ramifications for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We want American citizens to have better, safer, freer lives. But that's the important point. Pretty much all of us want that, liberal and conservative, but because we've wrapped our politics in dogma, we've castigated the other beyond the point of peace. We've gotten to a point where the election of a 4-year term president has all the gravity and apocalyptic doom of a satanic messenger arriving on earth. The progressives who view their progressivism as a religion, Donald Trump isn't just a bad president, he's the Antichrist. And it goes on and on and on. The media profits from the incendiary fear-mongering, which they do. And she goes on to say that the debate online less and seek out local associations. And I tend to agree with her to a certain point. I think we can have civil discourse online, but it does take two parties. And I honestly believe that if folks would get out there and discuss things the way I do not personally attack a person, do not start cussing and swearing at them, stick to the points at hand, always back up your points with references and stuff, and eventually more people start looking that way. I've gotten so many compliments on how I treat people, and it just amazes me that people take the time out of their lives to compliment me. And I appreciate it, and I thank them for that. And I don't do it for the praise. I do it because I'm a Christian, and that's the way I need to treat people, with love and tolerance. But that tolerance, that love and that tolerance can never, ever supplant the truth and facts. Never. And if it does, you lose something. You lose part of your soul, part of your Christianity, because you're not only waffling on the principles of the gospel, but you're actually exposing yourself to be a hypocrite. And we need to, honestly, folks, we really need to stop and think about what we're talking about, people. We need to stop and look first before any conversation takes place. We need, if I don't care if we're discussing something online with somebody, there's a person behind that comment. We have to remember that they're human just like we are, that they have a humanity about them. No matter how much we disagree with them, and a lot of these disagreements are political. They really are political. So no matter how much we disagree with folks politically, we still have to look at their humanity. And as a Christian, I have to deal with them in love and tolerance. As much as it relies on me, I got to be at peace with all men. But that doesn't mean we compromise either. And that's what happens with a lot of Christians. We compromise our Christian principles for the sake of getting along, instead of preaching our Christian principles and being an example to people, not being vile, not being profane, not personally attacking people and calling them all sorts of names and tearing them down and telling them their mom wears combat boots and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't do the argument any good. All that does is rile up emotions, and that's what we want to try to step around that and get away from riling up emotions and start looking to the intellect. But first, making sure that we know that man or woman we're having that discussion with and recognize their humanity. Doesn't matter what their race, their skin color, their ethnicity, their ideas, whatever. If we don't recognize each other's humanity, then the argument's lost to begin with. And that's what's happening on both sides. I see it happening on the right. I see it happening more on the left. If we go back to my left-right paradigm here, I see it happening more and more each way, but more so on the left. And Gracie's right. It's a 4-year term. They're not. Everybody said when Obama got in office, if he stays in two terms, they said America's going to die. It's going to go the way of the dodo. And guess what? Didn't happen. Do you know why it didn't happen? Because Americans like me and Americans like you who listen to the show didn't let it happen. Didn't let it happen at all. We weren't buying into all the garbage. Did we have to go along with some stuff? Yeah, we had to go along with some stuff. But I knew deep in my heart that socialism doesn't work. Obamacare is a socialistic program, doesn't work. It'll fail, and it did. And if the Republicans continue to travel down this road with the American Health Care Act, or not the ACA, they're with Ryan. Let me put Ryan Care. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to fail. You cannot put socialistic principles on top and try to make them work with a free market mindset that a lot of people have out here in America. It just doesn't work. And if it takes away from our freedoms and our liberties, it's not going to work because people are going to get fed up with it and try to change things. And again, there's such a religious fervor, a religious dogma on the left when it comes to these socialism or socialistic programs. And all you have to do is look south to another continent below us in our southern hemisphere, Venezuela, to see what happens when you implement. We have a perfect example of what happens when you implement socialism on a national scale like they did in Venezuela, and how quickly the country went down. And I was watching the news this morning, Maduro, United States, you quit messing around down here. It's our fault that the protesters are out there protesting socialism and his literally destroying the country. It's America's fault because we're fermenting opposition. So it's their fault. It's not his fault. Oh no, his socialistic ideas that are fattening his bank account, as they did Hugo Chavez's bank account. Hugo Chavez, when he died, he was a multi-billionaire. And he didn't work for that. He literally financially raped the country for that. Now there's another article down here, Pittsburgh, not Paris, I want to get into real quick. And there's a lot of articles on the show today. I don't think I'm going to get to them all. I did put up a bunch of articles about the Republican health care bill. If you want to go look those up and do some research, they'll be on the danclemenshow.com on the show page for episode 828. It's by Peter Wood. Pittsburgh, not Paris, explaining the climate hysteria. Humans in the near future, predicted Michael Moore, the documentarian filmmaker, in a recent tweet, will mark today, March 28, 2017, as the day the extinction of human life on Earth began, thanks to Donald Trump. Trump has just issued the executive order rescinding Obama's Clean Power Plan. Where does a prophet of dystopia go after predicting something like that? When Trump, in his June 1st Rose Garden speech, withdrew from the Paris Accord, saying, I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris, Moore was left with small change, calling it a crime against humanity. That's the term I was trying to remember there. He was trying to say that this was a crime against humanity, pulling out of the Paris Accords. And he goes on, Peter goes on, talks about the fervent, and I was using these terms and reading the other article, about the fervent authority that folks have when it comes to man-made global warming or human-caused global warming. And it is the scientist. And I didn't get this link up in the show notes page, but I want to share a link with you guys that goes along with this. You always hear about this 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening or global warming is happening. And there's an article here. I just found this website today in some of my research. I was reading through it, reading about, I always go and see what they're about, and I read some of the articles, well-researched. They're well-referenced articles here, but this article here is 97 articles refuting the 97% consensus. And I shared this with the guy I was talking to about climate change on Discuss, and he came back. It was like 2 minutes later, and so well, that's just internet propaganda. That's not real science. And I said, and I looked. There's timelines on there. I said, in the intervening minutes, you read all these references, right? And again, no answer from him. Didn't answer that question. They will not answer the questions because I honestly, folks, I believe that it'll make them look like fools. But this article has all 97 of these in here, and this is from a website, and this is why I'm going to put this website down. Climate Change Dispatch, your science and environmental news source. And I was reading about them last night. I was reading about them this morning, And the more I read about them and their references and everything, the more, the more I am dissuaded that mankind is causing climate change. The more facts that comes out, the more I believe that mankind has nothing to do with climate change. This has always been and always will be a wealth redistribution scheme. So, that's a good article if you want to go read that. Okay, if you want to read that, Pittsburgh, Not Paris, Explaining the Climate Hysteria. I just want to get that quote in there about Michael Moore, and this is where we stand at with these fanatics. They're bowing down at the temple of climate change. And climate change has become a religion to those on the left. And folks, don't forget about cartoons like Captain Planet, where they're talking about Gaia, the spirit of the earth. Don't forget about the watermelon environmentalists that run around out there that like Chicken Little, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. You got to give us so much money, this certain amount of money, and we'll stop the catastrophe. And I just wonder, and I don't know, I'm going to read some more on this, but I might even email these guys and see if they did research on this. How much money have these professors enriched themselves by that are claiming that there's climate change and taking money, government money, to do this research? I'm just wondering how much they've enriched themselves, or universities have enriched themselves. There's universities out there that are signing on saying that they agree with the Paris Climate Accord, and we're going to continue to do that. And it's like the mayor of Nashville, Tennessee, talked about that, which they all can. Governor Jerry Brown's over in China, was over in China, and said, we're going to keep up with the accords. It was voluntary as a nation. It could not be enacted. Again, President Obama overextended his constitutional authority in doing so. Because it never was a ratified treaty. It was always a voluntary participation, and President Obama, for some reason, took that voluntary participation as saying, well, it's not a treaty, we don't have to go through Congress, we'll just start enacting it, which was totally unconstitutional. So again, I'll put that link up. I made a note. I'll put this link up to the Climate Change Dispatch. You'll have a lot of fun reading some of this stuff on there. And like I said, a lot of this is peer reviewed. This gentleman that I was talking with on Discuss, so this isn't peer review, it's internet propaganda. And that's when I told him about, did you read that article? Did you run all the references? And I was looking at my watch. Maybe he has. Maybe he hasn't answered me yet. Maybe he has. Maybe he knows about this before I did. But I'm always open to resources like this that if there is climate change, show me the proof. But so far, everything's been a lie. From Penn State University to East Anglia University in England, and all points in between, every time. You know what they did? And I just saw this article. It was either I saw this article or I do too much research on my own, folks, honestly. Or watch it on the news. They're suspending trips. Scientists are suspending trips to Antarctica, testing, see how much ice there is, or their hypothesis was how little ice there was because of the growing ice in Antarctica, which NASA says has been going on for a few years now. They've actually suspended their expeditions down there. It's like, okay. You know, and they, honestly, folks, they were trying to prove that there was global warming because the ice is receding. Now, this gentleman, I didn't have time to go check it out. This gentleman was trying to tell me that the ice is receding in the Arctic. And it very well may be, but then you have to think about, if the ice is growing in the Antarctic, does that offset the ice melting at the Arctic? You know, and those are questions. If you question that, you're questioning the status quo. You shouldn't be asking those questions. You're not a scientist. And I'm thinking, but that's a common sense question to ask. To me, anyway, it's a common sense question. So I have some really good articles in here. The other thing that's been going under the radar, and this is another story from Investment Business Daily editorial page. Did votes by non-citizens cost Trump the 2016 popular vote? sure looks that way. And I shared this earlier in the week where we talked about this. So this is one of those other things that's going by. You don't hear the lamestream media talking about it, that they're doing the research, like President Trump signed the executive order for them to do so, and they're finding studies and stuff like that. And there's some state attorney generals that are starting to look into it now. And this study says anywhere from 500,000 to 5.7 million votes were cast illegally. Now, if that is the case, if that's the case, if they find, and I don't care what the number is, even if it's over 100 votes, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be more than that. But let's say we split the difference, and let's say it's 3 million votes were cast illegally. Will the progressive left out there, the naysayers like over at Let America Vote, Indivisible, and Common Cause, will they say they were wrong when they said there was no voter fraud going on? Just out of curiosity, do you think they'll retract everything they said about voter fraud? I doubt it. Honestly, I really doubt it. They'll try to spin it one way or the other. This is just like President Trump says the Russian thing's a witch hunt, which it is. This is just a witch hunt, and these numbers are made up. You need to show us the proof, yada, yada, yada. Hopefully they do show us the proof of these things. I did talk about, there's another one at the bottom it'll be at the bottom of the show notes page. It says critics of the Senate health bill aren't playing fair, and they're not. They're rewriting history and stuff like that. 6 things you need to know about the health care, and I love these over here. They do a good job over at Daily Wire doing their research and stuff like that. And this is by Ben Shapiro. I like Ben Shapiro. Some people don't, and I think sometimes he does get a little bombastic, but for the most part, he's like anybody else. We're all fallible. He doesn't get everything right all the time, and that's okay. You know, we can still listen to people like that. There's nobody perfect out there, folks. Not even me. I'm not perfect. Even though you might think I might be, I'm not. All right. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has done precisely what everybody expected. He has unveiled a watered-down version of the already weak House Republican Trump care bill. The bill is actually so weak that even Obamacare architect Jonathan Gruber is chortling, that it doesn't actually repeal Obamacare. That's because it doesn't. That's the first main point I want to point out to you here. The Obamacare light here, the Ryan care, the House, the GOP care going on here, doesn't repeal Obamacare. I thought that was part of the party platform. I thought that was what Donald Trump ran on. We're going to repeal Obamacare, and then we're going to replace it. And you lost me at replace, or you lost me at and. If you just said we're just going to outright repeal Obamacare, I'd have had no issues with the Trump administration. I'd have had no issues with the Republicans in the House or the Senate. But they went beyond. They put that and there, and it's like, oh man, what are they proposing now? Well, Obamacare light. Instead of just repealing Obamacare, getting rid of that horrid piece of legislation, passing common sense laws, and we talk about this all the time, folks, passing some common sense laws to let the free market and competition take care of things. States, and this is the other point that they will not tell you about, if they repeal Obamacare, guess what happens? And I did research on Pennsylvania and some of the surrounding states. Every state so far that I've done research on, they have not repealed their health care laws. They haven't. So guess what happens when this overreach of the federal government, that is Obamacare, is deleted? You know, you hit the big old delete button here and take it out of legislation, and you repeal it, just get rid of it. Well, it goes back to the states, folks, where it properly should be. And then the only thing the federal government constitutionally can do, through the Commerce Clause, is tell the states you cannot restrict competition from out-of-state insurers. That's a violation of the Commerce Clause, and that's something people have been hollering about for a long time. And that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. Pennsylvania has regulations in there covering pre-existing conditions and policies and stuff. If you're going to sell your insurance in this state, you got to follow those regulations. But if they open it up to competition, that'll drive the prices down. And so this whole thing about repeal, and once they hit the end, you need to stop listening. You need to start telling them to follow the Constitution. What you need to do. But since I started this article, I want to just go through the highlights. This is what we know. For one, the bill retains Obamacare's core regulatory scheme. Insurance companies will still be mandated to cover pre-existing conditions. The minute you force insurance companies to do this, they begin hemorrhaging money, since people will simply wait until they get sick to get insurance. That's why it's important just to repeal Obamacare outright and just knock this nonsense off. It's ridiculous what they're doing up there. Two, the bill re-enshrines subsidies to insurance companies, which it does. We're still giving monies to insurance companies. This is a unholy alliance between government and business. There should be a separation between government and business, and that should be a constitutional amendment. But it still enshrines those subsidies, which again kills the taxpayer and kills everything about health care. Do you know why? Do you know why it kills? And we got a perfect example with universities. If the universities are getting their money not directly from the students or their parents, but actually getting them in the way of Pell Grants and government-backed loans, and they're guaranteed by the government, guess what they can do? What they feel they can do without repercussions. They can raise the cost of tuition because the student isn't technically paying for it. And if the student defaults on it, Uncle Sam will pick up the bill. It's one of the negative effects of subsidies. Think about it for a little bit. If anything is subsidized, it invites mischief. It really, really does. The bill provides no new entitlements for middle-income Americans. Which again, just get rid of the dumb thing. I don't want an entitlement. I want to get the insurance on my own. The bill dramatically alters Medicaid down the road. And I'll read this one a little bit. This was Paul Ryan's great priority, and the Senate bill retains it. Originally, the House bill would begin rolling back federal funding on a need-based basis beginning in 2020 and end the open-ended funding and expansion of Medicaid enrollees. The Senate bill would now begin to roll back in 2021, but after the next election cycle. And in 2025 would create a growth cap on Medicaid payments linked to inflation rather than health cost inflation. This provides savings down the road, but those will never materialize since Congress can always dump those cuts by the side of the road. As Soderman says, the Medicaid provisions may be understood as budget gimmicks. Again, I've said this before on the program, if we would all have health savings accounts, wouldn't need Medicaid or Medicare, because we'd have enough money in our medical savings accounts with a policy writer that you get with your medical savings accounts to take care of catastrophic medical incidents, that you wouldn't need the government for Medicare or Medicaid. Or Medicaid, excuse me. Again, common sense, free market solutions to all of this. The bill, 5, the bill defunds Planned Parenthood for 1 year. Well, whoop-de freaking ding do. There's another thing where we have a private industry like Planned Parenthood getting tax dollars. Separation between business and state, folks. 6, the individual mandate and taxes disappear. That's one of the biggest pluses to it, but all the rest of it, when you add everything up, doesn't amount to hill of beans. Again, just repeal it, let the state laws take over again, and do the Commerce Clause legislation where the states cannot refuse out-of-state insurers to sell their insurance policies in the state. That creates competition, that drives prices down, and that also, in that competition, we're talking about health insurance companies competing with medical care providers. That'll drive down the cost because they have an incentive to keep the cost down, so they're going to start doing more and more deals, get the government completely out of it, let the free markets take over. How many times am I going to say that? It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. But the progressive anti-freedom left, if that happened, there would be no more virtue signaling for them. Well, they still would. Oh, all these poor people out here. is anybody in your sphere of influence suffering from that? Oh, they are? Then you help them, or you get a group of people to help them. Why are you worrying about someone in another state that you know nothing about? Don't know. All they are to you is a statistic that you can virtue signal over. That's all they are to you. Okay, let's see here. Oh, big news come out today. Trump says he did not record conversation with Comey. And if you listen to his original statements, he says, I hope there's no tapes of it. For your sake, there better not be tapes of it, because he was saying Comey was lying, and Comey said that he wasn't. And if there were tapes of it, it might prove that Comey was lying. But there is. I didn't think there was tapes on that at all. I never bought that line to begin with. I have an article in here. Media coverage of Gifford's shooting doubled the Scalise shooting by Joy Pullman over at thefederalist.com. Oh, that other one with Trump and the recordings was by Alex Pfeiffer over at the Daily Caller. And that was a really good article here with the shooting, the Kathy Gifford shooting. The media coverage was double that of the Scalise shooting here recently. And there is media bias in this type of reporting. There just is. Dozen of EPA staffers weigh in on the damage Trump has inflicted, which hasn't really, maybe to their careers, but nothing else. This is by Rebecca Lieber over at Mother Jones. And, she comes at it from a leftist point of view where, if we take away the EPA, then the world's going to come to an end. And again, every state in the Union, and I believe even Puerto Rico and Guam, has their own department, like their EPA at the state level that takes care of things. So if the EPA goes away at the federal level, guess what? We still have the state EPAs to protect the environment. And that's where it should be constitutionally. And I even sent a tweet to her, Rebecca Lieber, and asked her what about the constitutionality of the EPA. Should it exist constitutionally or not? I don't know if I'll get an answer back. I'll check out the show. If I do get an answer, I'll share it with you on Monday's show. Real quick here. I'm down to just about a minute, just a little over a minute. This is a poll. This is over at Free Beacon, Washington Free Beacon. It was posted yesterday by Stefan Gutowski. Poll: gun owners more likely to find fundamental freedom essential than non-owners. And in my life, I believe that to be the case, because I know people that support the Second Amendment, but they also support the First Amendment and the other ones. And people that don't like the Second Amendment sometimes don't like freedom of speech. And that is the truth of the matter. And it amazes me how people get away with saying, they don't support one amendment, then they don't support another one. And they all go together. They're all part of the same thing. Well, folks, that's the music. That's the end of the show. I want to appreciate you for being with me for this week and sticking out the technical issues. I'm Dan Clements, the host of Dan Clements Show. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you Monday at noon. And don't forget, on Sunday, go attend a church of God's choice, not your choice. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.